Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Rebecca, 28 years old, fresh from a wedding to Richard, a man 7 years my senior. But let's rewind a bit, shall we? Let me sketch the day Richard and I first crossed paths. It was at one of those elegant garden parties our parents adored hosting. I was 18, just out of high school, and Richard, 25, the rising star in his father's company. I recall him strolling up to me, a glass of champagne in hand. "Rebecca, right?" he asked, his voice as smooth as silk. "I've heard a lot about you." I remember blushing, unsure of what to say. "And you, Richard?" "I've heard a lot about you too," I replied. He chuckled, a sound that stirred my heart. "Hopefully all good things." We spent the evening chatting, laughing, and to my surprise, forming a connection I hadn't anticipated. It was that night our parents, seeing us together, entertained the idea of us tying the knot. It took a few more years, but eventually, their plan materialized. Before we exchanged vows, we signed a prenup, a simple arrangement. If one of us strayed, the other could walk away with $3 million. I had no intention of straying, so I signed without hesitation. I remember the day vividly. My dad, a man of few words but a heart as vast as the ocean, looked at me with concern. "Are you sure you're okay with this, Rebecca?" he asked. "Dad, it's fine," I reassured him. "I trust Richard, and he trusts me. This is just a formality." Richard was there too, insisting on signing the paper. "I don't want you to feel cornered, Rebecca," he said, his voice strained. "If you're not comfortable, we can discuss it more." But I shook my head, smiling at him. "Richard, I'm fine with it. I trust you." He seemed relieved and echoed, "And I trust you, Becca." That marked the beginning of our journey. We married in a grand ceremony, the talk of the town. I was thrilled about this new chapter, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. After the wedding, we settled into a beautiful house on the city outskirts, a dream come true. Living with Richard, waking up next to him every morning, was surreal. He was sweet, caring, and for a while, everything felt perfect. Our honeymoon was like a fairy tale, 2 weeks in a beach resort soaking up the sun and each other's company. But when we returned home, things shifted. Richard became distant, lost in his thoughts. He'd arrive late from work, head straight to bed without a word. We slept in separate rooms, ate at different times, barely speaking. One day, I confronted him. "Richard," I said, trying to steady my voice, "what's going on? You've been acting strange since our honeymoon." He looked at me, his eyes devoid of warmth. "I've just been busy with work, Rebecca," he replied, avoiding my gaze. "But we barely talk anymore," I persisted, feeling as though we were strangers inhabiting our own home. He sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "I know, Rebecca. I'm sorry. I'll try to make more time for us." But things didn't improve. If anything, they worsened. Richard started coming home even later, sometimes not until the early hours of the morning. He stopped eating with me, and our interactions became scarce. Suspicion crept into my mind. Was he seeing someone else? The thought churned my stomach, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I decided to confront him once more. "Richard," I said one night as he returned late, "are you seeing someone else?" He looked shocked at my question. "What? No, Rebecca. I would never do that to you." "But you're always out. You never spend time with me," I said, tears welling up. "I told you, it's just work," he said firmly. "I'm not cheating on you, Rebecca." Yet something felt amiss. Richard wasn't the man I married. He was distant, cold, and secretive. Conflicted, I resolved to uncover the truth. If Richard wouldn't confide in me, I would find out myself. I began by checking his phone while he was in the shower. Guilt gnawed at me, but desperation drove me to seek answers. I found no suspicious messages or calls, But a discovery made my heart sink. Richard had been searching for apartments. Was he planning to leave me? I confronted him. Richard, why are you looking for apartments? Are you planning to leave me? He looked taken aback. No, Rebecca, I was just looking. I wasn't planning on leaving you. Then why were you looking? I asked, my voice trembling. I don't know, Rebecca, he whispered. I need some space. One day, I turned to my mom for advice. She's always been my rock. Mom, I said, I don't know what to do. Richard's changed. He's not the same person anymore. She listened, her face full of concern. Rebecca, she said, you're both still adjusting. You're newlyweds. It takes time to build a life together. I wanted to believe her, to believe that this was just a phase, that things would improve. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Richard was concealing something, and I could feel it. I attempted to dismiss the feeling, convincing myself that Mom's reassurance held truth, yet the nagging voice persisted. A constant reminder that something wasn't right. A few weeks later, summoning courage, I approached Richard. I need a job, I declared, meeting his gaze. He appeared surprised. You want to work? He inquired, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. Yes, I need to do something, Richard. I can't just sit at home all day. After a brief pause, he offered a position at his foundation, which aided children in challenging circumstances. Taken aback, I accepted without hesitation. The foundation's work was renowned, and I had always admired their efforts. Working there breathed new life into me. Busy and engaged, I encountered resilient children who had faced more hardships than any should. It was heart-wrenching, yet uplifting. The job provided solace, diverting my mind from home troubles. Though emotionally demanding, it felt meaningful. I believed I was making a difference, finding happiness amidst turmoil. Still, Richard's demeanor remained perplexing. Determined for clarity, I decided to hire a private detective. Doubts besieged me, and peace of mind became imperative. I enlisted Joe, a seasoned ex-cop with a sharp eye and no-nonsense demeanor, detailing my concerns. I awaited his findings anxiously. I'll do my best, Rebecca, he assured, his expression stoic. But I can't promise anything. His report later arrived, his demeanor grave. I'm sorry, Rebecca, he said. I couldn't find evidence of your husband's infidelity. Relief mingled with disappointment. If Richard wasn't cheating, what was he concealing? Grasping for answers, I paid Joe for his services as he departed, leaving me with a heavy heart and unresolved uncertainties. A profound sense of loss washed over me, grappling with more questions than answers. Working at a charity fund, I encountered Daniel, the new addition to our team. Handsome and charming, he possessed qualities that could easily capture anyone's attention. His wit, humor, and striking good looks painted the picture of an ideal man. Yet beneath the veneer, a nagging unease lingered. Daniel's arrival felt too perfect, too convenient. I couldn't shake the thought of Richard and the prospect. Could Daniel be a pawn in Richard's game to ensnare me? Determined to unveil the truth, I rehired Joe, the private detective who had previously investigated Richard. Joe embarked on the task, delving into Daniel's background, connections, and movements. Meanwhile, I maintained cautious distance from Daniel, despite his persistent charm. Though tempted by his invitation for coffee, fear of the unknown held me back. When Joe presented his findings, my suspicions were validated. Daniel was indeed connected to Richard, a revelation that stirred a mix of emotions within me, anger, relief, and sadness, as I realized the depths of Richard's deception. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a sense of vindication prevailed. I wasn't imagining things. My instincts had been right all along. Grateful to Joe, I bid him farewell, embracing newfound closure. Though I had narrowly avoided a costly mistake, the encounter with Daniel left its mark. I had glimpsed the facade of an ideal man, only to discover its hollow core. Despite the bitter realization, I resolved not to let it define me. I was resilient, capable of finding happiness on my own terms. I didn't need an ideal man to complete me. I was enough. I longed for someone genuine, someone honest, and I was determined to find that person, no matter the obstacles. While I could have dismissed Daniel outright, I opted for a different approach. I decided to engage him, to befriend him, while maintaining impeccable conduct to avoid giving Richard any ammunition against me. Daniel, however, misinterpreted my friendliness, believing he had me under his spell. The irony was lost on him. He was the unwitting pawn in my game. Yet, I kept my intentions hidden, wary of him running back to Richard. I sustained the charade, keeping the facade of friendship intact. One day, I raised the stakes, inviting Daniel to lunch under the guise of discussing charity work. He agreed, sporting a self-satisfied grin, convinced of his progress. As we conversed, I cautiously probed about his views on Richard, careful not to betray my intentions. Daniel's responses hinted at his confusion regarding Richard, reinforcing my suspicions. In subsequent encounters, I continued the pretense, treading carefully to avoid arousing suspicion. It was a precarious game, but one I was willing to play, at least for the time being. During one of our lunches, Daniel approached a delicate subject, hinting at the bond between us. My heart raced. This was the moment I had feared. Concealing my discomfort, I feigned enthusiasm, acknowledging his sentiments. It felt like manipulation, and a pang of guilt pierced me. Yet I knew I had to maintain the charade to keep the game afoot. As I affirmed our special connection, I realized the depth of the deception I had woven. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at home with Richard remained frosty. Our interactions minimal, his absences routine, citing convenience for work as his excuse. One Sunday, overcome by curiosity, I dialed Daniel's number. The next move was again fraught with uncertainty. Infusing my voice with a feigned warmth, mirroring the deceit that had brought Daniel to my doorstep, I invited him into my home. Daniel crossed the threshold, expecting the enticing lure of a seductive housewife. But instead, he was met by my old classmate, now a stern-faced police officer. He had agreed to assist me, and the shock on Daniel's face was a satisfying reward. The officer scrutinized Daniel's documents, confirming our suspicions. They were as counterfeit as a $3 bill. With the evidence laid bare, it was my turn to make a move. I presented Daniel with a choice: remain loyal to Richard and face the consequences of his fraudulent documents, or defect to my side. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded, accepting my offer. Checkmate, Richard. With Daniel now my informant, the true game commenced. Richard, a cunning adversary, wouldn't yield easily. In the ensuing days, I monitored Daniel closely, wary of his unpredictable nature. Though useful, he remained a potential threat. Summoning Daniel to my office, I adopted a serious tone. It was time to delve into Richard's machinations, to unearth his strategies and plans. Daniel hesitated momentarily before agreeing to divulge everything he knew. Thus, I gained my insider, ready to launch a counterattack. But this was merely the prelude. The real battle lay ahead. Richard wouldn't capitulate without resistance, and I had to be prepared. The stakes had escalated from mere gamesmanship to all-out warfare, where survival was paramount. As weeks passed, impatience gnawed at me. I yearned to confront Richard, to prove I wasn't the submissive pawn he presumed me to be. Joe, my trusted ally, offered counsel. Provoke Richard, make him believe I had fallen into his trap. It was a risky gambit, but I was resolute. Daniel and I orchestrated a staged photo shoot, carefully crafting images that hinted at impropriety, yet safeguarding their origin, preserving their innocence, entrusting Daniel with the envelope containing the fabricated evidence. I urged him to deliver it to Richard, letting him draw his own conclusions. Daniel's apprehension mirrored my own doubts, but there was no turning back now. In this escalating conflict, the rules of engagement had blurred and only survival mattered. I know, I replied, a steely resolve in my voice, and I'm ready. The very next day, Richard wore a facade of smiles at dinner, thinking he had outsmarted me, yet not a word escaped his lips about it. But I wasn't perturbed. I knew what was coming, and I was prepared. Meanwhile, Joe was relentless, digging up dirt on Richard, unearthing the evidence we needed. His dedication and skill were unmatched, and I trusted him implicitly. Finally, Joe called, his voice rough with satisfaction. "I've got him," he declared. "Photos, videos, the whole shebang." A rush of excitement flooded me. "Good," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "Let's bring him down." But I didn't confront Richard, not yet. I wanted him to think he was winning, relishing the moment he realized he'd been played. So I waited, playing the part of the dutiful wife. As the clock ticked toward the family dinner at Richard's parents' mansion, I knew the showdown was imminent. Halfway through the main course, Richard stood, a smug smile adorning his lips. "I have something to say," he announced, producing photos of me with Daniel, tossing them on the table as if presenting a winning hand. The room fell silent as Richard accused me of infidelity. Yet I stood, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Yes," I said calmly, "I know this man, but he's not my lover. He's an actor hired by you, Richard, to frame me." With a confident flourish, I played a recording of Daniel's confession, shattering Richard's facade. But I wasn't finished. Pulling out my own evidence, I confronted Richard with his own indiscretions, his attempts to deny futile against the undeniable proof. His parents' disappointment was palpable, their trust shattered. The aftermath was swift. We divorced, Richard's parents ousted him from their company, and his reputation lay in ruins. Meanwhile, I walked away with $3 million in compensation. Richard, now jobless, struggled to rebuild his life, while I relished the freedom from his deceit. I had outsmarted Richard, playing his own game better than he ever could. It felt satisfying, indicating I had won, and now I basked in the tranquility of a life without him. As I reflected on the tumultuous journey I had undertaken, I realized that my victory wasn't just in outsmarting Richard, but in discovering my own strength and resilience. I had navigated treacherous waters, facing deception, betrayal, and uncertainty, yet emerging stronger and wiser on the other side. With Richard's deceit exposed and my independence reclaimed, I embarked on a new chapter of my life, free from the shackles of his manipulation. I channeled my energy into pursuits that brought me fulfillment and joy, building a life on my own terms. As time passed, the wounds healed, and I found myself surrounded by genuine friends who supported me unconditionally. I forged meaningful connections and pursued my passions with a newfound vigor, savoring each moment of freedom and self-discovery. And as for love, I learned to trust my instincts and open my heart once again, this time to someone who cherished and respected me for who I truly was. In their embrace, I found the happiness and contentment I had always sought, knowing that this time it was built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. In the end, my journey wasn't just about defeating Richard. It was about reclaiming my agency, finding my voice, and embracing the power within me to shape my own destiny. And as I stood on the precipice of a new beginning, I knew that the best was yet to come. The moral of this story is that strength, resilience, and self-trust are powerful tools in overcoming adversity and navigating through difficult circumstances. It highlights the importance of staying true to oneself, standing up against deceit and manipulation, and embracing the journey of self-discovery and empowerment. Trust your instincts, stand up against deceit, and embrace your inner strength to overcome challenges and shape your own path. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.